Hello, and how are we all going? My antidote to everything is books. I may qualify that at some later stage in my life, but at the moment, this is the true thing. Coming to mind, before I present you these 4 new releases, would be 2 little sayings that are quite appropriate. One is variety is the spice of life, whether or not we like it to be spicy or varied. It's not what you do, but the way that you do it. And both of those kind of cover the 4 books that I've chosen to talk about today. And before I waffle incessantly about, philosophies of life, we will have a look at the 4 books I have for you. Now, the first one up today is The Leviathan by Rosie, and that comes to us from Raven Books, which is Bloomsbury. Oh my goodness. We're back in 1643 in Norfolk in England, and it's at the time of the Civil War. And a young soldier, Thomas Treadwater, comes back to his family home, which is a farm, and finds his father incapacitated with some nameless disease. His pious and younger sister is kind of losing the control over things because there had been I was about to say a wench, and that's very unfair once you read the book, which I highly recommend. But there had been a young woman who had been about the place and had got friendly with her father, and then there are all sorts of accusations about this young woman who has now been carted off to jail, having been a witch. This is one of those, I can almost hear the groans like, oh God, witch stories. It's not really a retelling of the misunderstood wise woman who has a valuable skill to bring to communities and knows about, like the Stacey Hall's books, which I do love, has a valuable contribution to society. This one it walks along that line of, well, you'll think you know where it's going to go, and then all of a sudden it kind of veers off a precipice really into these lesser well-known tracks. And it's kind of a downhill descent in a way in terms of your reading, because at this point we're all galloping really. It gets quite sort of pricklingly sinister in places. It's very definitely not what you think it's going to be, though all the other elements of the good witch hunting, witch finding stories are in here. This just goes somewhere completely different, which I must admit I just found, and I'm going to say I was hooked by this because there is a kind of, with Leviathan, there is a kind of a fishy ocean, deep, monstrous things rising from the deep element to it, and whether that's fear or sort of a religious imagining. So there's some biblical references. There is this kind of, this pious and wild sort of contrast going on in the book. I thought at some point it was, it's the fact that it's so rooted in fact and was so utterly believable in places, it kind of stopped the book sort of developing its own monstrous bat wings and flapping off into very weird territory. And I don't mean weird, I mean that into that sort of supernatural. It just stays on the side that makes it spine-chillingly brilliant. Just don't come into me with stories about how this created insomnia because A, you couldn't put it down, and B, it is a little bit it's superbly gothic. It's deliciously, seemingly gothic. Because anything about how you couldn't sleep, I have the t-shirt. Been there. And there is a Leviathan. Just so you know. It's a smasher. If that's your thing, historical fiction with a bit of a twist, that's a good one. We're back with the women again for book number 2. Now, this was one that I was absolutely stunned by in a lot of ways because of, again, this is one of the ones, it's not, and it is what he's saying, obviously, but it's the way he says it. Lukins is, Robert Lukins, the author of Loveland, which comes to us from Allen and Unwin, is one of my top reads so far this year. and I think it'll probably stay up there for a while. Now we're inside the minds of women again, and how very, very perfectly Robert Lukins does this. I was quite astonishing. He kind of, I suppose, he summons this atmosphere, not just this knowing of women, but also this whole atmosphere of what they're going through and what they're living. And he does this with very, very few and obviously very, very powerful words. We do have two women, and they're related to each other, and we have two timelines, and it's essential that we have this. It's not one of these, oh my God, two timelines, I don't like that. They're essential. It's essential for the book's symmetry to have these two. So we have a 1956 storyline, and we have a contemporary, 2000 and something, a contemporary storyline. And these two women are grandmother and granddaughter, if you like. And even if you don't like, that's what they are. I suppose perhaps the most striking element of this book is, how did he know? How does Robert Lukins get inside a marriage to this extent and present it to us from a woman's perspective? Because it is possibly uniquely, and apologies to people who have lived this from another perspective, but it seems to be a very much more dominated by women way of looking at a marriage, and marriages that are of their time in the 1950s, which would not be at all sort of comfortable, we wouldn't be comfortable with now, and again of their time in the current, but they're both lived under this kind of oppression, and it is a male source of this oppression. And Lukins evokes this all the time through the kind of the atmosphere that these women, particularly the 1950s, is living in. Because this young woman, Katy, marries a man who's sort of trying to breathe life back into a hotel on the edge of on the hill overlooking a lake, and has managed to do some work for it, but his dreams begin to outweigh, or his ambition outweighs his capacity to do so. So, and you can feel him sort of spideringly keeping her in place. And eventually her world diminishes to the fact that she's going to have a baby, and that she has a little friend who comes in, another young woman who comes in and cleans and helps her out. And then there's the lake. And slowly this lake also begins to take on a kind of polluted, unhealthy, sort of sludgy feel. It's astonishing how the toxicity is both in the person and in the land. How he writes it, I mean, I think he must be a magician, because it is incredibly wise writing. A young woman in the Australian contemporary has to inherits this. You know, it's not a poison chalice, it's a whole poison sort of bowl of a lake. And that makes her look at the history of what she thought she knew about her grandmother's family and the life that they then had, and how women recognise each other and recognise each other's troubles. Definitely a top class read for me. The stories, I think, speak to each other very strongly all the way. And Lukins does this all with this very tense, very spare writing, but with a full and, I don't know, a sort of, a tender, compassionate understanding of how this can happen. Astonishing. I'm left bereft. Another Australian one, I'm kind of bookending these. Another book that also left me sort of speechless. I'm very rarely speechless, as you all know. I've no idea where that should be going. That's about right, isn't it? An absolutely astonishing book by Omar Sakr, Son of Sin, from a firm press. And it's one of those books that knocks you off course. That's the only thing I can say. It is the story of I suppose why it knocked me off course, I'm going to go back, is because it's something, a whole world, a whole universe, about which I have no knowledge. That's my own ignorance. But we can't live everybody else's lives, and we can't always know what other people's lives are like. But it's very rare to have someone like Omar Sakr come along, and if you like, he gives you his shoes. And he being also Jamal Smith, who's his main character in this book. And he lets you walk in those shoes for the length of this book. And the journey is not a journey in pages, it's a journey in experience, in culture, in understanding how a young Australian man of Lebanese and Turkish sort of cultural influence and Muslim, and also a Muslim upbringing, and also his identity and gender exploration, because he is queer, how different and how traumatic and how utterly fascinating, utterly compelling that story was. So you are given this generous gift of being allowed to walk in that life. And I wasn't always, as a reader, I wasn't always very comfortable with some of the things I was reading, but I was enthralled, not just because of the story, because this is one of those rare books where it's not just what he's saying, but it's how he says it. Because his poetics, his mastery of language, his way of, he knows, we both know that we're entering territory that isn't isn't something known to everybody. So, but it also has to be made accessible and pure and magical and funny and tragic and bleak, and it's everything in one big book. It's about shame. It's about who being caught between cultures, being caught between wanting to sort of be conventional or be understood in your community, and then actually finding out that maybe you are and you've never been able to see it because you've been so aware of your shame at being gay or bisexual, and those are not easy things or comfortable things for me, and they mightn't be for another reader. But this is a gift to all of us who haven't much personal experience, and we're allowed to know it. And I found that just the most extraordinary gift, and also the most extraordinary piece of writing. There's a poet, Omar Sakr is a poet, and this is poetry. It's poetry within the prose, and it is probably an award-winning book. I will put money on it. And one you should pick up, and one you should give to your children and your grandchildren. Not too young. But yeah, keep an eye out for that one, because that's not going to go unnoticed. And our last little one, again, it's one of those, it's not what she's saying, it's how she says it. Julie Otsuka's The Swimmers. This comes to us from Penguin. And many of you, I presume, will know The Buddha in the Attic that she wrote quite a while ago. And don't ask me for a date, because I cannot do that for you. I can't remember. An extraordinary read, very... we're back to sort of Robert Lukins's territory in the way that the writing is very pared back, a little bit like you might get with Elizabeth Strout or somebody else. Even Helen Garner. Yes, that kind of simplify it, but it's depth and nuance and layer. This is a very, very beautiful book. And one I picked up and said, oh, I'll read that in no time, but it's actually a book I think I need to go back and read again, because it's almost a book about something terribly inconsequential that actually is enormous. The inconsequential thing is a crack appears in the bottom of a swimming pool. Is it really there or not? We don't know, but there are a bunch of swimmers who come to the swimming pool. It's an underground swimming pool, and they come there mostly in the evenings, but not always, and they all kind of know each other. So it's about a little community. It's about who you think you know, and it's about how much you're prepared to accept what you don't know. So they don't agree whether they can see this crack or they can't see this crack. You're sort of going, what is it about this crack? At the same time, Otsuka's doing lots of other work or lots of other storytelling about the people, about who they think each other might be, and how they keep these sort of distances between them. There's distance in the lanes they swim in. They segregate people into groups. And so it's a little bit about how the control we have over our lives. In another on another level, this is almost, I think, a love letter from a daughter to her mother, who has also, you feel, kept distances between herself and her daughter. So it has that little Lucy Barton feel from Elizabeth Strout, though it is very different. And this, one of the swimmers, Alice, is beginning to lose her grip. Things aren't as clear. She's becoming forgetful. And you know that it's probably some type of, dementia. And parts of there's a disintegration, or the cracks, the fissures appear in the, not in the marriage as such, but in the understanding of who her mother was and why there was this distance. And or is there an explanation for the distance between you and another person that you may or may not love? It is about love, and it is about how we look at people, and it is about what happens when we get old, and it is about how, despite the confusion that goes on in the mind, or that might affect the words or the sort of cognitive abilities, you can still put your hand out and recognize someone in another way. It's absolutely, it's not glorious, it's not the word, but it is it's a smiling book. It's a hug in a way, but you get both things. You get kind of that reassurance that things are okay even when things aren't. And so you have that kind of clinical aspect to it, because Otsuka describes everything and categorizes everything, and then you get the mess of the mind and the fact that we're still reaching for or trying to understand the person that we've been born to or who we have given birth to. A very, very lovely book. So that's my roundup. Goodness, I meant to be quick, and now I realise I could waffle. No, I don't waffle. I say very useful things to you about books, but I could natter on about those for quite a long time. So you know what to do. You know where they are. It has been lovely talking to you. I hope you have enjoyed watching this video, and you know what to do. You know where these books are. Come to your local bookshop and come and buy them. And I will see you for the next round. Bye-bye.